Yeah. So there's multiple moving parts, but remember, even though I like math, I have to work at it really hard. And by the time you start doing geometry and trigonometry and so forth, it starts getting a lot more creative. Now, eventually I did calculus and, as I call them, serious and difficult equations, serious and diffie, and abstract algebra and all sorts of advanced math. But the teacher, I was really struggling with it, but it might have been because I was working so much, because I was working by that time, 30, 40 hours a week as a high school student. So that was one play.
Welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast, where we unravel the life stories of unique and successful entrepreneurs. We will take a deep dive into their highs and lows and over-the-top accomplishments. So get ready for the Founder's Journey podcast with your host, Jimmy Dulambakis. Welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast, everyone. Today we have Randy Johnston on with us today. Thank you, Randy. How are you?
Excellent, Jimmy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners.
And thank you. Looking forward to hearing your story. Looking forward to knowing who the young, the middle, and a little older Randy is, and everything in between. So, Randy, tell us, where'd you grow up?
So you going to try to make me grow up on this call?
I am.
Yeah. It turns out I am coming to you from my office in Hutchinson, Kansas today, and I was born here. So I'm probably not a mile from the hospital that I was born and my parents' home. So I've just pretty much stayed here. But, pretty much all the way through the school experience and whatnot, I've been kind of in this neighborhood, if you will. And many of my friends are still here. And, we've worked in this community for a long time. Only was out to school for a bit, for a couple of years to Kansas State, but most of it was right here all the way through. Now, in terms of interests and things like that, Jimmy, I was always kind of a curious guy, and I'll just help your listeners help picture my neighborhood, because I was fortunate enough across the street to have my grandparents, and my grandfather was a mechanic, could fix about anything. So I've fixed a Model T with him before, and we used to fix mowers together. The guy directly behind us was a Navy CB electrician. So I learned electrical wiring from him. The guy directly across the street from our home was a carpenter. So I learned carpentry from him. And the guy slightly off to the angle was an architect. And I learned architecture and bricklaying from him. So I can build a house from design all the way up with all the components, as it turns out. And I just kind of go around the neighborhood and just learn from people around me. And then my circle kept getting bigger and bigger as it went over time. But because of that, you might hear I'm kind of mechanical oriented. You give me something, I can usually see my way through it and fix it, or engineer something to make it work. And that has served me well through so many years in so many different industries.
And your family structure, you have siblings?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I am lucky enough to be the youngest of four, three older sisters. And one of my older sisters lives about 2.5 miles from us. Then I've got one up in Kansas City, one out in Colorado Springs. And she moved to the Springs in the early 60s, long before, a lot of people moved to Colorado. So, that part was good. And, each of them have maintained their circle of friends here locally too. So, like many parts of the country, there are certain cities, and this happens to be one of them, where there's a lot of legacy, family members. I see that when I visit places like Pittsburgh or St. Louis and the Chicago neighborhoods. There's certain places like that. But here, it's kind of small town America is probably the best way to think about it.
That's awesome. And do you think, and like growing up, I have a question about where you learn from people in your neighborhood and whatnot. Now, and the reason I'm asking is because I feel like the younger generation now isn't really going to the older generation and asking a lot of questions like, oh, I could figure this out on the internet. I could watch a video, right? And there's a video that tells you how to do it, but the context isn't really there, right? And do you feel like, did you go up and ask them, or were they kind of like, oh, here's a curious kid, let me take him under my wing and show him how to do this and that and different things?
I definitely asked the question. And there's two or three learnings I'll say I had from that, Jimmy. First, I learned that you can learn something from everybody. You just have to listen to them. And it doesn't matter what their economic position is, how smart or dumb you think they are, that you will learn something from everybody if you'll just ask. And I usually want to get background just like you're getting from me. And so I was fortunate enough to ask, and they originally started saying, "Well, you really want to learn about?" "Oh yeah, I really want to learn about this." So I can still gap condensers, for example, and points. So I've got all of that type of knowledge still, but it is quite different to learn it from somebody who does it every day or is really professional at it. And if you think about it, all these guys were really trades professionals and they were good at what they did. And so that was fascinating. But another little trades professional, our grocer, who had an IGA store, an independent grocer, was actually the first person who met my mom when she arrived from Australia. So my mother was a war bride, and it was fascinating to go to his grocery store and talk to the butchers and all those things. But his son is the reason that I'm in computing because his son worked for IBM and he was doing this very interesting thing about, uh, well, it was 3270 code, and a lot of your listeners wouldn't know what that was, but the original screens that were used by the big mainframes, he figured out how to write that code initially. And when I was listening to him, ask him what he did, and he explained it, and I said, "Well, that's pretty fascinating stuff." And he said, "Yeah, it's a really great career." And of course, we used to play golf together because I've been playing golf for, 65 plus years at this point. And, so we had this group of golfing friends, which I'll call the golfing buddies. But, a Southwestern Bell field engineer, and I can still hear him talking about installing fiber optic and how he argued with the engineers that it would break if you made him pull it, and it did. Or, another guy who worked for the Santa Fe Railroad and how the railroad crews worked. And, again, I'm thinking about that golfing group. Remember, I'm a kid. So, at that point, I'm probably 8 to 10 years old, maybe caddying. And then by the time I'm 12, I'm playing with all these guys. But most of them were employed in all sorts of different businesses around town, and you'd rotate different groups. And I always ask people, what do you do? How do you do it? And so because of that, there were almost no careers that I didn't get exposed to directly by somebody who was willing to share. And that's the other thing that you almost always learn if you would just ask and then be quiet, let the other person talk, you'll learn a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like for about probably like a decade, I was working. I own a business in real estate. I staff notaries for basically real estate transactions in New York State. But when I started, it was just me by myself, and I would go to these appointments. I would notarize docs, and I was meeting people from all over. I mean, not just New Yorkers, but people from all over the world that would just move to the city and New York City and they're living there, or hedge fund managers, lawyers, plumbers, subway, MTA, engineers, like all vast people. And I'm a very social person. I'm not chitty chatty. Well, what do you do? Or well, how does this work? And when you're in their house or you're in a conference room, just the two of you, or two, three people just talking, they start sharing all kinds of stuff, and plus I feel like people like to share things with me, like it's maybe my personality, but I learned so much. And what's interesting is a lot of people, they're buying these really expensive homes. And I'm like, how did you build wealth? That's kind of like my curiosity. And they would tell me, look, this is what I did. I was in a business, or I invested in this, or I was the first employee at this company that went public. And, I would invest in these and over time. And I started learning all different aspects of that. And like you said, I would ask the question and then just quiet. I wouldn't say a word, or maybe I'd have a couple follow-up questions. And then I was like, wow, that's amazing. How do I learn more? I go read a book, or I had curiosity. But I do think that some people are feel like they don't want to bother them. Oh, don't ask that question. That's rude. Don't ask them how they built their wealth. Like, it's none of your business. Well, at the time I was in my 20s. I was a young person. So it's like, as a young person, like, what does he care? Let's tell him, you know what I mean? And no one said it was easy, right? No one said it is guaranteed. They say you got to work hard. You got to be smart with your money. And one guy told me, he owned a company that sent text messages, right? And this was years ago. And he goes, Jim, I make money at nighttime when the text messages go out. I make money when I'm awake. When I'm sleeping. And he goes, I'm making money all the time, right? And he goes, that's the best. When you don't have to be awake and the register is still ringing, he goes, that's the best business. So anyway, Randy, so I
Yeah,
want,
but listening to you talk about that, to me, that is exceptionally fascinating too, because the diversity of all those people that you were, learning from, I don't know how you get much better exposure. And I'm actually thinking, the best way to build wealth, as I would see it, is by owning and running your own business. It's kind of hard to become independently wealthy when you're dependent on somebody else. It can be done, but realistically, uh, the tax code and all the things
Mhm.
that are available to you as a business owner are really the path forward. And it is real bloody hard to kind of step out on your own. But let's just pick on something mechanical like a plumber. If you've got plumbing skills, you can work for another plumbing company, or you can have your own van and your own tools and, maybe struggle a little bit, but you can absolutely build your own business, even with just something as straightforward as that. So, there is no limit to what you can do. If anything, it's just a limit of what you think in your mind you can or can't do.
Yeah.
But also your point about just approach people, what I've found is almost every person, almost no exception, that I've asked is just happy to share their story. And they're not put off by it. They want to share it. And they just can't believe that you're interested enough to ask. And if you're interested, cool on you. You ought to ask.
And the people that I was talking to at these signings, right? We only had half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, whatnot. And I remember, getting comfortable. Actually, that was the precursor to this, right? So now I'm sitting with you and I'm asking you. And I was telling a friend of mine earlier that, when I've been struggling to start this for 4 years. I took step one, did nothing. I bought a mic, did nothing. I'm not going to bore you, but it just dragged and dragged. And finally, I realized that the reason why I was trying to do it there was two reasons. One was, what are people going to perceive me as? And two was, how do I help and create value for entrepreneurs? And I realized that the first part really wasn't important to me at all. I don't care if somebody thinks I'm successful or not. Or if this podcast is successful. What I care about is creating value for other entrepreneurs, right? And I believe that because if I can give them value, and then they can go create value, what's the multiplier of that? How many people get affected in a positive way, right? Um, but anyway, so your story. So what happened in the beginning was when I started asking people, nobody wanted to be on the podcast. Friends of mine that I've known for decades, they told me, yeah, I'll be on the podcast. And then I call them, they're not returning my calls, they're avoiding me. And I'm like, hey, listen, it's okay. Like, you don't have to be on, let's just be friends. Like, they just felt bad. Like, what happened is, to share your story, you have to be somewhat vulnerable, right? It wasn't that they're mad at me, or that it's just more of like do I really want to tell the world my whole story? And how are they going to perceive me? So at first I was like, what is going on here? And then I realized, okay. And then once I got a few out, like Randy, I mean, we connected via LinkedIn, and here you are telling your life story, and the amount of support and camaraderie that I'm receiving through the entrepreneurship ecosystem is grander than I ever expected it to be. I just didn't expect it to be this way. So I'm very grateful. I'm very humbled, and that's why I'm putting time and energy into growing this and getting everyone's story out to the right, section of people so that they can be impacted. So anyway, I don't
Yeah,
want to talk
so
too much
no, that
about.
I get you, and I'm actually just as fascinated to listen to how you got to this point with the podcast, because I was reflecting on the types of things I learned from this extended neighborhood. And, it really did take a village to raise me, if you want to think of it that way. And one thing that I kept from all that is I'm far more interested in helping others be what they can be, and what goes around comes around. So when I'm asking people, I'm not really asking for me, I'm asking really for them. And that sounds a little um, biased, I guess I'll say. But what I do know is that in my business life right now, people are amazed how much I will give and give and give. And Jim, for your listeners, the way I'd illustrate this with the old balance scales. And what I try to do is I try to put stones or weights in somebody else's scale until they're just really weighed down with all the things that they ask for. And then again, it's not lording it over them, but if I need a little help with something, I ask, and it comes back in a heartbeat. So, I always try to treat every person, no matter who they are, when I encounter them as, a highly valuable person. And, I do have to admit, though, I've probably got 7 or 8 people that I'd be glad never to see again. It's not like I like everybody, but I do tend to like most everybody. But there are some people that don't treat people well. And, you know, I guess I follow the grandma rule on that. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of the way that goes. But, as you're kind of listening to that story, you can hear that it really expanded from the immediate neighborhood to a social circle of really what was my parents' friends, and then it is extended out with my school friends, and those have been with me for a long time. And that part really led then down several other paths for me. But one of the friends that also influenced greatly uh, wound up being the manager of an IBM mainframe system, and I eventually went to work for that company after getting out of school. But I wrote some of my first computer code in 1961 on an IBM system at that point in time. So I've been doing computing a long time. I've been doing AI for over 50 years. But it was like I just had this opportunity, and they said, "Would you like to come into this computer room?" And it was one of the raised floor, air conditioned, really something else to be around. And it's like, this is pretty good. Same as I learned from the son of the grocer who was working on the big IBM mainframes. And it's like, this computer thing could be real. And, in the 60s, it wasn't maybe as obvious uh, because, let's see, what are we, about 50? We're 50 years this year into Apple's creation. And, it was Wozniak who said everybody should have a computer.
Yeah.
And, it's such a big deal because really, if you think about, most of us are carrying small computers, we call them smartphones, with us. That's kind of a nifty deal.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how everything comes full circle. Like I've had a handful of entrepreneurs, probably in their like late 50s, early 60s, where they kind of jump started in the 90s with the internet, right? And how computers and the internet connected. Your career goes back further where you started when computers were starting to incorporate into the day-to-day, right? Not the internet, but just like basic computer functions and how they all communicated within a big organization, right?
Yeah.
And
In
how
fact,
that,
it was quite the trick, Jim, because at the time that I was helping, and literally, I'm going to say help build the internet, I was helping with ARPANET, which is the precursor for the internet. And it's like, well, this is pretty fascinating communication stuff. But you're right. Those standalone computers were really, if you go back to IBM's history in the 1800s, they were tabulators. 1890s was vote tabulating on the IBM equipment. And that's what was really going on, is they were just calculators, big, fast calculators of the day, and became more sophisticated. So, yeah, I've been fortunate enough to see the arc, you know, s- skills that I still have that are worthless today. I can still read a punch card that has no ink on it. I can tell you what the punch card says, and I can wire a computer board, and that's a skill that nobody needs. And I can still write in COBOL. In fact, you'll appreciate my wife and I had unfortunate incident in the house last May where we had a water pipe break and it damaged 8 rooms. But it was only about 9 months into the remodeling that we finally got to put our books back up on the shelf. And 2 weeks ago, I was looking at the COBOL book I used to teach from, and she said, "Do you really need that anymore?" And I said, "Well, I'm getting old. I can't remember stuff. So I can look in here and maybe get a reminder." But then I said, but then maybe it doesn't matter because today with I can take COBOL code and rewrite it in a modern language. Yeah, maybe I don't need that, but
Just
it's,
from memories.
yeah.
All right. So, as a child, were you a pretty good? How were you academically in like middle school into high school?
Uh, Thank you for asking that. And pretty good is the short answer. Now, it was not easy because I could tell there were smart people. Okay. But I was more of a work to get it done type of person. And so I did well academically, but it was really a lot of lifting. And I could see other people around me were not having to lift so hard. And I'm good with that, by the way. I've been hung with a lot of smart people through the years. Probably the other thing is uh, I don't test well. So, to really advance in certain professions, law and medicine, for example, you have to test well. That's not me. So you put a test in front of me. It's not that I'm going to choke. It's just like I probably overthink it. And
Mm.
so therefore, I will always do poorly on standardized testing because I'm looking at the structure of the question saying, well, it really could be this or it could be that instead of just going on. But other elements related to school is I actually learned public school, learned to play an instrument, and I'm still participating in that today. So I'm president of the Hutchinson Municipal Band here in Hutchinson, and that band was formed in 1875. And so I still play an instrument. And, my daughter, we're fortunate enough that she lives on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. And I went home with her last week after being at a business meeting, but she got out of the Outsiders because she's the wardrobe manager there. And we're going into her building, and the guy's walking in. I said, "Is that a trombone on your back?" And he said, "How'd you know that?" And I said, "Well, I still play bass clarinet." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I played since I was 8." Okay. So I played a long time. And he said, "Really? You still like it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I was up playing a concert in the Bronx and I played the Radio City show this year." And he said, "It's been a lot slower since I'm not doing that now, but my daughter worked Radio City Christmas Spectacular for 4 years, but wound up also in school doing theater, which was fascinating because I didn't know a lot about it. And so, you can see it's kind of diverse interests. But what my probably real love was the sciences.
Mm.
So, when it came to biology, man, that just seemed to click. When it came to mathematics, that clicked pretty well too. Um, you want me to do English? Not so good. French? Yeah, I can do okay with French. So, I had excellent French teachers, and so I enjoyed foreign languages, which was another thing, but I didn't know I should have been learning Spanish instead of French. I was thinking I
Yeah.
might be a,
Well,
a
at the
diplomat.
time, listen, French was going hard for like decades. Like it was all about French. Spanish was like it was French, Italian, and then Spanish. Like that was kind of the popularity of the languages when I was growing up. I have to say something though. It's interesting you were talking about taking tests. You weren't testing good. I wasn't a I didn't study well. I didn't understand, I never really learned how to study properly. So my goal was go to the class, absorb the information, try to remember it, and then take the test, which obviously you could tell my grades weren't fantastic. But what I learned when I was taking the multiple choice questions was that, uh, and I tested this over several years. That's why I'm going to know. 80% of the time, if I went with my first gut answer, it was correct. 80% of the time. When I second guessed myself, flunked. It was terrible. Um, because what happened was my subconscious mind was, I was absorbing the question and my subconscious mind's like that. And then I'm like, well, hold on. C looks kind of like A and B. It could be B. It could be B. And then it's like 20 minutes. I'm on like one question and like I have 20 more minutes to take the whole test. So
Yeah.
I learned by making mistakes that like your gut, and I use this, and the reason I bring it up is I use it in business. Typically, my gut, and it's really interesting. Like I can't explain how guts really work. It could be subconscious mind. It could be a feeling internally that this is right or this is wrong. And you don't have a lot of information usually as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you have limited information, so you have to kind of just roll with it, right?
Yeah,
So
very frequently you have very limited information, but I am lucky enough to, have been married here for 50 years and we dated in high school. But if there is a question, I always listen to the spouse, right? Because the the spouses often see things you don't.
that's true.
And it doesn't really matter whether you're a female entrepreneur or male. Listen to your spouse because they're going to see things that you don't. You are complementary along that line. And it's part of the reason why in businesses, if you're a solopreneur, I think that is harder than having a group to work with. Yeah, there's politics and disagreements and so forth when there's more than one person, but it's the sounding board, and
Yeah.
that's kind of a big deal. But your gut reaction is actually interesting to note because eventually I actually did take educational psychology tests or courses and how to build proper tests. And so today, when I look at a test, I actually pedagogically look at it and say, that's structured wrong, but you know, it's not one that I get to create or control.
Yeah.
So that part's interesting to me. But as we got here, because sciences and math, good stuff. The soft stuff, not so much. And it's not that I didn't, and I really enjoyed history. So uh, even when I was very young, I loved to read biographies and autobiographies. So I guesstimate I probably had read 1,000 biographies by the time I was out of sixth grade, without exaggeration,
Uh,
because all of the founding fathers and all of the inventors and so forth, man, if I get a biography on somebody, I want to learn how they grew up. So that's kind of what you're doing to me here. It's like, it's like, well, how'd you grow up?
well, it's interesting you say that because I'm the same way when it comes to autobiographies, especially if it's in business or some type of creator or somebody that can create something, right? If I read a book on, I don't know, real estate law or how to invest in real estate, I can get through that book, normal pace. But if it's a book about someone's life and it's quite interesting, I can read that book twice as fast as the other book. Something about my curiosity just will drive me at an accelerated rate. Like when I'm doing these podcasts, these are about an hour, hour and a half, right? I don't have to rush. I'm asking you several questions, you're responding, and I'm learning as I go. And then it's just like a lingering curiosity for days after, right? I'm like, man, Randy said that thing. What did he mean about that?
Well, and you'll
What a
appreciate
story.
because
No,
a couple of books that
it's
I've
not like when the
completed.
podcast ends, I go on with my life. It's like I'm showering, I'm hosing, I'm watering the plants. I'm like, what did he mean by that? What was that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and you'll appreciate because I do read a lot of very varied books, but recent biographies completed include one on James Taylor. What an interesting bloody guy.
Yeah.
His life was a mess, but he knew so many people and he influenced so many things. Man, what a great biography, the James Taylor biography. And I actually just finished Dick Van Dyke's, How to Live to Be 100 book, which
I
my
heard
wife
that was
gave
a
me
good
for
book.
Christmas.
I heard that was a good one.
It was absolutely worth reading. It's like, well, there's an interesting thought. There's an interesting thought because not that Dick Van Dyke had a perfect life either, because he wound up being an alcoholic for a period of
Yeah.
time, right?
A lot of those guys, a lot of the entertainment guys, you go back to, Jackie Gleason and all those guys, like they were drinking, they were smoking cigarettes. It was, late nights. It was tough life. Who's the guy who smoked cigars till he was like 90,
Birds.
Burns, right? So I came across just recently, days ago, he was on Johnny Carson. And Johnny goes, like, "Birds, how many cigars you smoke?" Goes, "I smoke about 10 to 15 a day." And he goes like, "And your doctor? What does your doctor say?" He goes, "My doctor's dead." He's not around to tell me. He goes, "I outlived him," because he was like 93. God bless the guy. You know what I mean? But anyway, so back to your story. Now you get into the sciences, you get into mathematics.
Yep.
You're in high school, right? And I want to know, what was your thought senior year, right? You're thinking about going to college, right? Or you're thinking about where you're going to end up, what you're going to do. What was going on in your mind, or kind of the society, that your community? What was everyone thinking? Like, are we going to go to the military? Are we going to go do this? Like, what was the paths at the time for you?
Yeah. So there's multiple moving parts, but remember, even though I like math, I have to work at it really hard. And by the time you start doing geometry and trigonometry and so forth, it starts getting a lot more creative. Now, eventually I did calculus and, as I call them, serious and difficult equations, serious and diffie, and abstract algebra and all sorts of advanced math. But the teacher, I was really struggling with it, but it might have been because I was working so much, because I was working by that time, 30, 40 hours a week as a high school student. So that was one play. Second play was, you might remember it being very disruptive. Your listeners don't know, but at that point in time, I'm watching things unfold like Watergate. And of course, I'm number one in the draft to go to Vietnam. Okay, that doesn't look good. But just at the point in time where the draft was discontinued. So really, most of the students were of the mold, "Hey, I think we better go to college. Otherwise, the males, we're drafted. We're out of here to Vietnam." Right?
If you went to college, you waived, they allowed you to not go to the military?
That's correct. You had a waiver. Now, you could actually go on for officer candidate school and come out a second Louis, but yeah, and that was a pretty good alternative, because if you knew you were still going to get drafted, well, better to go in as an officer uh, than an enlisted man,
Yeah.
right? But in any case, so realistically, it was pretty obvious. You could do VOTEC schools at that time, and they were good. But the problem was, you're getting drafted. So, there are a lot of people dying in Vietnam at that point in time. And of course, I was fortunate enough, I'll say it like that. I was fortunate enough that, my parents had organizations they belonged to that had meetings in different areas. So I was in New York, in the 68 time frame when it was burning, and wound up with accidentally getting into riots in Harlem, and, down to DC when DC was burning. So, I got to see, unfortunately, some really ugly stuff as all of the protests were going on at
I
the
just
time.
wanna, because I think it's so important, because, like, obviously the world today there's a bit of unrest and things are going on and whatnot. And I think that the younger generation thinks that, like, this is the first time it's happening, right? And it's not, right? As America, I believe that as America continues on its path, it's going to have growing pains, it's going to contract, it's going to expand, and there's going to be uprush, so let's go back to high school. It's during the Vietnam War, right? You're in high school, right? There's the media, the newspapers. It's all about the war, and you're a young person. You're like, life is, my future is bright, but I mean, am I going to get drafted? Am I not going to get drafted? Right? About people that went to war, didn't make it back, right? Like,
Yeah, I did. And can you afford to put gas in a car? Because it was the days of oil embargoes, gas lines, and no fuel. right?
So
Which
what is so what so growing up as a young person there and then seeing what's going on around the world kind of now, like, are you surprised?
I am not surprised in the least. It really did set my path to be very people centric. So, I tend to be very tolerant of lots of different types of people because I believe that, all people have similar desires. They want to be happy. They want to be healthy. They having a good family's a good job. You know, there's a lot of real common things all over the world. And probably part of that, Jim, comes from my mother's background is full Australian. In our trips back to Australia, uh, you know, play hard, work hard is very much the tenet there. But this disruption that I was seeing in the 70s, it's way less disruptive right now. Now there's, you know, the truth was probably a little more straightforward, but the day we're recording this yesterday, the guy who reported that Nixon had tape recorders died. He was 99 and died yesterday. And, I remember his testimony saying, yeah, Nixon has tape recorders, and to my knowledge, they're being used. And of course, that wound up proving that Nixon was lying in office. And my friends at the time many of them were thinking that Nixon was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm thinking, this guy's a criminal, right? So even in those times in the 70s, we saw that type of behavior. But in general, if you were caught lying, not telling the truth, it was career over. Okay. And that is a difference in the current environment because now it's, yeah, well, people lie. Well,
Yeah.
no, some of us don't. And,
Right.
that's another one that my friends know they can take to the bank with me because if Randy says it's so, you don't need a contract. You know it's so.
Yeah.
Right. And I
Yeah.
will make mistakes. So I readily admit that. But that's kind of a difference. So this friend environment of, what do we do? We're pretty much all on the same path. We were among the earliest of the Earth Day occurred in that time frame too. So we were around for day one of Earth Day, right? So taking care of the environment. There were a lot of things that really set the course, which actually explains in my mind why you're seeing elderly protesters on the streets in the United States right now, because we were the same protesters of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I see. I see. That's interesting. It's like full swing. So, and I just want to touch base on you said you were in New York and DC during while it was burning. Could you explain because I don't think a lot of people know what that means that New York City was burning.
Oh, yeah. Well, the rioters would often light fires, set cars on fire, set buildings on fires. In many cases, they were in, I'll use the word tenement, which, obviously there's the tenement museum in lower Manhattan, where the Jewish tenements, but, a lot of the people in Harlem and up in the Bronx, they were in buildings that were very poorly maintained by the owners, which really led to a lot of the New York restrictions. The same thing was actually happening in DC, though. Rioters there were likewise setting cars and buildings on fire. And again, not what I would consider the right thing to do in a protest. Today we hear about peaceful protests. These were violent protests, right?
Yeah.
Because, you had National Guard being deployed, and at Kent State, you had the shootings there. And so you had a lot of confrontations with police on the street because they didn't know how to control the rioters. And
Yeah.
the rioters probably, in my mind, the rioters probably were correct. Now, you have to also understand historically, my dad was a policeman. So, I have a lot of history on law enforcement. And my brother in law was a detective, also a policeman, became detective. And my goal was to get into computing to actually do advanced police work on big computers.
Hmm.
So that's
And
where I was headed.
that's where you were senior year. That's what you wanted to do. Okay.
That's what I thought I would do. So I really went on then to get computing degrees, and I wound up with way too many degrees. So I actually have a light physics degree, computer science degree, mathematics degree, social science degree. So you're kind of getting, it's like I've got this variety. And fascinatingly, um, I should have known it sooner, but I didn't. When I came out of college, then I was interviewed and offered a job by IBM, and they wanted me to move to Armonk. And I said, I'm not moving. I'm from Hutchinson, Kansas. That's where I want to live. And the IBM manager kind of closed the door and said, son, you do not know what you're doing. He said, if you want the opportunity, you have to go where the work's at. And I said, I don't think so. And he was hot because he wanted to hire me, which was, that would have been a great job, but I was not willing to go. And I found out to run these big NCIC computers, I'd have to move to Washington, D.C. Yeah, not doing that either. Now, today, you probably could do a lot of these jobs remote, but in those days, you had to go where the work was. And it's like, nah, I got my circle of friends. I think I can have a good life right here. And I may limit my opportunities, but I'm good with that. And as your listeners will hear in a bit, it actually opened up opportunities, didn't limit me.
So tell me, so you went to college and then you come out, you get this job offer, you decline it. And then where do you go from there?
Yeah. So now the next pieces are going to get real complicated, Jim, and it's good complications. I went to work for a group called Formarco Farmland, and I wrote grain accounting systems. So, when wheat is stored in big elevators, it has to be accounted for. But I also wrote systems for feedlots and for credit unions. So it was a great experience. And I ran on a 37168 Mod 3, the biggest, fastest water-cooled computer available in the world. And a lot of times I'd go in at night when things didn't work and make them work, that type of thing. But here's where the twists start, because it was a very good job, but I wanted to teach. So I wound up leaving that job to teach at a local community college, and I began writing textbooks. So at this point, I have 6 college textbooks that I've created. And along the way, I started teaching teachers how to teach this content. And what happened then is I wound up getting contracted by hardware and software technology companies, if you will, to help with their products. Why did that happen? Because I was a hardcore programmer. I wrote additional systems on a mini computer known as an IBM Series 1. So I wrote a hotel and lodging software called Logistics, which is still used today for many of the back-end hotel systems. I wrote the first paperless claims in the medical industry, which was handy. And it taught me about, medical diagnosis and all sorts of stuff. So I have a lot of healthcare background because of that. But I'm in the mainframe world, headed into the mini world, and then I see the opportunity coming with the PCs. So I'm an original hardware designer of many things, including I worked with Apple on the Mac and the iPhones, and with IBM, of all things, on the ThinkPad. So the little round mouse thing in the middle of an IBM ThinkPad keyboard, that's my design. It's called TrackPoint. Helped HP with laser jets and inkjets and Compaq with their servers and so forth. So you can hear a lot of hardware. But I also was lucky enough to work with Microsoft on Windows and on Microsoft Office. So the original menu design of Microsoft Office is mine.
Randy, you were, say it again?
The original design of Microsoft Office for their menus was mine. And Excel was 40 years old last year, so I'm the designer of pivot tables and of the accounting format in Excel, but also have designed a whole lot of other accounting applications.
Did you, and were you an entrepreneur at this time, or were you a freelancer, or were you all of the above?
Yeah, kind of all of the above, because there was a period where I was a full-time instructor, mainframe programmer, mini computer programmer, college instructor. And then at that point, we were using the proceeds of my programming to buy franchise operations, computer franchise operations for a group called Computerland. So we were microcomputer retailers before the IBM PC was introduced. And I got the first IBM PC in the state of Kansas, the first compact in the state of Kansas, and so on. And we continued down that path of franchising, but those were my businesses. And as we used that, then I got invited into lots of different companies to do design work. So today, it's pretty good for your listeners to just be thinking about technology stuff, not Facebook, not Salesforce, not Google, but I've pretty much worked for everybody else at this point. So, there's many things that I can look at and say, well, that's very fascinating. But as you heard earlier, my wife and I have been married 50 years this year. I was inducted into my high school Hall of Fame in 2010. And they wanted something to read at the ceremony, and I wrote it up for my wife and said, would you check this out and see if it sounds okay? And she came back and said, you did that? You did that? And I said, yeah, remember I was under non-disclosure dear, so I couldn't tell you anything I was doing. She said, well, you used to come home and I'd ask you what you're doing, say, I can't say. And she said, it always bothered me. And then eventually I just said, well, you told me you can't say, so you can't say. And that was the reason so much of that stuff was under non-disclosure, which was interesting, but I got to hang with lots of real smart people. So because of that, I'd walk into a room, kind of as I usually say, a simple guy from Kansas, but walk into a room, try to understand the problem, make some suggestions, help them implement them if I could, move on to the next deal. So that helps me, Jim, satisfy my personal mission statement, which I wrote in the early 80s, by the way. Help as many people as possible do things with technology that benefits them the most. It's pretty straightforward. So I've lived that for, all the years since I wrote that in 1980.
46 years later, huh?
Yeah.
And you know what is the mission statement is so powerful, right? Because if it's true and you do believe it and you start implementing it, it starts compounding, right? So like from 1980, when you wrote that, did you even think that you would be in those rooms sitting with
Oh,
those people?
no way. No way. I was just thinking I'd be working locally and helping people locally.
Yeah.
And it just kept expanding and expanding and expanding. And so, if I'd do a good job one place, I'd get invited to another place. And that's just the way it worked. So because of that, wound up in all sorts of places, which would be too long and too boring for your listeners to hear. But, I didn't have a plan, by the way. That's the other thing that I will say. Most people say you should make a plan. And I just went where I was invited next.
And
And
how were you compensated for this? Was it hourly? Was it per project? Like, how did you calculate what your time was worth and what the problem was? Did
yeah,
you
it depended.
undercharge? Is that why they hired you more? Like, what was your angle?
It depended on the situation because I did all sorts of different types of engagements. I might charge hourly. I might charge for a project. Might take stock in the company as payment. And, that let me work with the founder, also typically entrepreneurs, in ways that benefited them the most because they realized pretty quickly I wasn't there to take over the company or tell them what to do. I was there to help them.
Yeah.
And, in some cases that did amount to dollars. In some cases, hourly dollars or flat rate dollars. But in other cases, it was like stock, which sometimes became quite valuable and sometimes quite worthless. And it
Yeah.
didn't matter to me.
Yeah. I got that situation where I involved myself in a few startups and they're still going. We'll see what happens, but there hasn't been much money coming
Yeah.
back from them. But
Yeah. So it turns
I
out, but a
enjoyed
whole lot
working
of
with them.
those clients though made it public and,
Yeah.
a whole lot of them, crashed and burned. But the deal is, it was the passion. So every day I'm after it. In fact, the call I was on before we did our podcast recording today was with a client out of South Africa. And he said, "Man, how are you so fired up every day?" And I said, "I'm just doing what I love to do. And all I do is just go to the next thing that I love to do." And it's like,
Yeah.
there's, I've got so many balls in the air and I like having a lot of balls in the air and I'm pretty good at juggling them and I keep a lot of them in the air and I just pick the next most interesting one and work on that.
Actually, got a funny story recently. I do podcasts all different times because people in all different parts of the world. So I had one at like 8:30 at night, and typically around 7:30, I take a magnesium gummy. Tell me, that helps me relax and sleep at night. So I forgot about the podcast. So I take the magnesium gummy, and I'm on this podcast, and I'm getting drowsy. Right? It's like hour. It's an hour, 15 minutes in. I'm like, just hang in there. But what happened was I'm so pumped about these pod episodes, these interviews that like it didn't even really phase me. Like I wasn't like I was like, I'm a little drowsy, but I'm so interested in what's going on and engaged. And I do. It's interesting that you followed your passion, and it seems like your passion guided you to a lot of different places, which we're going to go into now. So let's talk about, did the business at any point, did you hire staff and grow like a larger business? Was it very agile and just kind of like project to project? Like how did you do it? Because you've been in business for a few decades, right? Doing these things.
That's
Uh,
right.
so what was
So
the
the
structure?
so the business that I'm sitting in today, NMGI, has been around since December 7th of 1983. And the co-founder with that business and myself, he actually had a phrase that was interesting. You want to be big or you want to be profitable, choose one.
Mm,
And so we actually always probably were smaller than we might have otherwise been, but we probably violated that rule at one point in time because we grew to multi-locations with hundreds of employees. And we looked at each other one day and we said, all we're doing is working, driving one location to another, managing all this stuff. We don't know everybody's name. It was the day that I realized I didn't know every employee's name. I said, I don't have to be that big. So we wound up selling off that operation. We maintained the arc of the corporation behind that, but just said, yeah, that's not what we want to do. So we made a change at that point in time. So generally, most of my businesses, Jim, have been smaller with intent. And it's because I know I'm directly affecting those employees' lives and we have personal relationships. Now, I realize you're going to make a lot more money if you have, size and scale. And I've helped a lot of people build that type of business, but that's not the business I want. So the other gentle thing I'll say, some advisors I've listened to say you should follow your passion. I don't know that that's exactly the best thing to do. Likewise, I've heard it said that if you have something you love to do that's a hobby, you can turn that into a business. That might work, but I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. I think it is far more logical that you're actually doing something where you're helping others and you like doing that thing because it's not about you, it's about them. If you've got that
agree.
attitude, if you find something that you like to do that helps everybody else, that's the winning combination. And what will happen is if money's important to you, it will come to you. But if money's your goal, you'll probably be more like Rockefeller, who was asked, how much money do you need? And his answer was, one more dollar than I have, which
Yeah.
means you'll never get there. And, again, you should not listen to what other people tell you should be. You should listen to yourself. We'll go back to your gut comment earlier. You got to listen to your gut on this. What is it I want to be? Now, I want you to have enough money that you can pay the bills and all that stuff. But bottom line is you can have, a pretty good sized number of people working for you if you can build the right structure to manage it. But you're not going to touch everything as you get larger. If we go back to military platooning as an example, the military basically includes one person can take care of about seven other. And that's, if you look at military structure, that's how it's really mostly built.
Mm.
It's span of control of about seven people. And once you
Yeah.
get beyond that, you get to double that. You almost have to have other managers in there. So now you're not really directly touching that, other layer. So I don't want to sound like I'm a big fan of hierarchical management, but, flat management, unless you've got really great processes, just doesn't work very well.
I agree. I mean, I've had businesses with lots of employees, not hundreds, but dozens, and I liked it. I like to have. I think my sweet spot's like 100 or less. 80 or less. Whether they're full time employees or contract based or partnerships, I just like to know everyone, and I used to be very hands on, very involved, and I've kind of learned now that I'm getting a little older that I'm putting people in place to do those roles because honestly, sometimes they're better than I am at those roles than I think I was, right? Um, and following the passion's interesting because I followed my passion and I was broke a lot of times. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
uh, like I was like, I'm going to do this. And then, I didn't have the capital or I didn't have the team or whatever. And I just couldn't get it going. And then no one wanted to buy the product. And I was like, what am I
Yep.
doing here? Right.
Yep.
And the why, it's interesting you mentioned the why, right? Like the reason has to be bigger than you. And for me, I always wanted to I have a story about running a marathon, right? And New York City Marathon is a lottery. So for the first 3 years, I kept putting my name in and they kept declining me, right? I thought it was because my last name is very difficult and they didn't just want to enter the name in. But the 4th year, someone tells me about a team called Fred's team that runs for cancer. So you run, but you raise money. I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. Okay. I says, I'll run for them, right? For cancer. I said, it's bigger than me. And because I ran for them, I pushed myself even harder. I was able to accomplish more. And I was part of a community of people all with the same goal, right? So you take that model and you put that into a business and the success rate does go, and it's not guaranteed, but you have a higher rate of success when everybody's why is the same and it's bigger than you, right? And how you helped so many people and so many companies. And I really I respect what you said about scaling back and saying, hey, this is just too big. This is just not for me, right? The misconception of entrepreneurship is big and get private equity money and exit and make all this money. Well, how about every day we just show up and we do great work, we're great people, and produce great products, and that's more than enough to make everyone happy.
Yeah, I really believe that to be true for me. Now, again, I often will say it like this, Jim. When I look around, I always want people to do things legally. So I will say I'm the legal judge, but I'm never the moral judge. You should live your life and be happy. Your choices are your choices. I'm good with that. And so there are times though when I will look at the choices and just no, I wouldn't make that choice. I might even coach the client to say, yeah, are you sure you want to do that? But if they say, yep, that's what we want to do, good on you. Okay, here you go. But through the years, and I won't disclose them all, but I will tell you that I've disengaged from 3 companies that all of your listeners would know about because they were doing things that were illegal.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah,
And it's like, nope, you're not getting Randy's help to do that. Nope. Well, we'll pay you a lot. I don't care. Right. So, I know the lines that I won't cross on those types of things. And it's been interesting to look back on that and had no regrets at all. So, this attitude about helping others, I realize there's some that have an attitude, I need more money. I want more money. I'll do whatever it takes. But if you can turn your attitude towards helping as many people as possible, you'll discover that that produces usually a lot of revenue. And the more people you make happy, the more revenue it produces. And that can be very much an accelerating curve if that's the thing you want to do.
yeah,
And so, but you and I probably are similar, Jim, on that light. I like where I pretty much know everybody. That's why for me, smaller numbers are good. Now, on the other hand, yeah, I've got a Rolodex that just won't quit because I probably do know by face and often by name 50 or 60,000 people,
Yeah.
which sounds stunning, but I'm older than some dirt, so I should know a few people. And,
Let me ask you.
as I said before, pretty much anybody that I know, if Randy says he needs help, he's getting help, right? And so be wise enough to ask for help when you need it, because the other thing that you said, which is absolutely right, anything that you can do, somebody else can almost certainly do better.
Yeah, it's
So,
true.
a lot of entrepreneurs think that they're the only ones that have the idea or the only ones that can do it. I think that's also misguided. You may have an idea that nobody else has thought of, but my rule of thumb is if you've thought of an idea, two or three people have already thought of it. Now it's just, can you execute the idea? It's rare. It does happen, and I do get to see it, that somebody comes up with an idea that has just never been thought of before. It still happens even today, but most ideas I see, it's like, yeah, that's been done before. How are
Yeah.
you going to do it better?
So there was I was hosting entrepreneurship events in New York, and we would do like pitch decks and pitching competitions and whatnot. And at the end of the event, one of this young entrepreneur comes up to me. He's like, "Oh, I'm working on this company," and I say, "Oh, what does it do?" He goes, "I can't tell you. You have to sign an NDA." And I said, "Whoa!" I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, because it's like no one's doing this." I said, "Listen." I said, number one, I guarantee you somebody's already doing this. We just don't know about it. And that's okay. Number two, if I was to steal your idea, I would have to spend 80 hours a week for the next 10 years. And then that still doesn't even guarantee that I'm going to do it and it's going to be successful. I said, I said, but if you share your idea, then maybe more people can help you. But I said, if you keep it so close to the heart, to the chest, I said, "You're missing opportunities with a lot of people that could be probably on your team working with you to get this idea off the ground," you know? He didn't know what to say. He was like he's dumbfounded because in his mind, this is like a nuclear weapon. Like, everybody wants this idea, right? But like, I'm like, I don't really care about the idea. Like, I mean, I don't even know what it is because you didn't even tell me. I can't help you. So back to your point.
Yeah, and on that point, when you think about it as being more of a attitude of scarcity as opposed to an attitude of abundance, when you're trying, I understand protecting intellectual property, and unfortunately, through the years, I've seen big companies steal a lot of intellectual property from entrepreneurs, even when they had all the legal paperwork right.
Yeah.
But the rule of thumb is if big companies want to steal your intellectual property, they can afford a lot more sophisticated lawyers than you can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use the courts just to get their way. And, you know, I'm not going to go fight in court. I don't mind doing that. And I have been an expert witness on intellectual property theft before. I don't like doing that. But, in many cases, I've been in, well, as the, you know, Hamilton Broadway show says, I've been in the room where it happens. And so I've seen so many of these things firsthand. And that's why I have stories about technology companies that I probably should write, because I actually have the real story as opposed to the fabricated public story. And it's like, yeah, that's not true, because I was in that room. That's not true.
Yeah.
But, does it matter? Probably not. Most people don't care, don't know.
I mean,
And
there's probably lessons that can be learned in there. I wanted to segue into your family, right? You have children? Yeah.
fortunate to have four children,
Okay.
um, and seven grandchildren. So I actually got to play with the grandchild in New York Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
Yeah.
because I was there for business meetings and just enjoyed the time there. But uh, two girls followed by two boys.
Okay. So while you're on this, you're running your businesses, you're growing it, you're shrinking it, and all the different, roller coaster rides that you go through. How are you dealing with what was the family structure like, right? Was your wife working? Were you home with the kid? Like, how did you manage? Because you said in the beginning or before we jumped on that you traveled a lot, right?
Yep.
So how did you manage the family life plus the entrepreneurship life and balance it all.
Yeah, that was a tricky thing. I did not start my extensive travel until youngest son was 13, and that was probably still 2 years too early. Now,
Mm.
was I doing travel when the kids were really small? Yes. But we were fortunate enough that I was pulling in enough dollars. My wife, who is clearly smarter than I am, uh, stopped teaching because she was an elementary teacher. She actually has an elementary degree in 9 specialties. So English is a second language and reading recovery and she's got a lot of them. But she stayed with the kids, which was really helpful. And then I would always give 100% of the focus while home. In other words, I wasn't working on Saturday and Sunday. I was home and with the family, and that probably wasn't enough time, honestly. But then as things evolved, when opportunity came up, I always took the family with me wherever I could. So
Ooh,
when we
interesting.
launched Windows 95 and Office 95 in Australia and New Zealand for Microsoft, the family went with me to Australia and New Zealand.
Mm.
And I think that my kids are fortunate because my wife and I scheduled time that we would have all 4 of our children in all 50 states before they graduated from high school. I just happen to
Oh,
think travel is very broadening. And I think it's important, for example, that, if you're in middle school, you probably ought to have been to Washington, D.C. So
yeah.
we made multiple trips to D.C. to time that with the kids as they were there. But also, the national parks, I thought it was important. So literally, Jim, I think it would be fair to say I might be a paid tourist at heart. Wherever I go, I have something else I want to see. And I did the same thing with my family. So we've kept the family very close through all the years and all of the grandchildren very close through all the years. And frankly, that was part of the reason why I was not willing to go somewhere else. I wanted to be around the extended family. So we had my parents and my wife's parents and sisters and, everybody right here. And so when we went on vacation, we weren't going to see family somewhere. We were going to see something different.
Yeah, because they're
And
all there. That's
and
awesome.
so
That's a very
notice
unique
that's
life.
that's a little weird take on it, but you know, I'd rather live where all the family's at than make an occasional trip to see them. I mean, and we're still doing that today. We had a family birthday dinner this past Saturday and a granddaughter birthday party the weekend before that. I mean, that's just the way we roll.
And how did you deal with like stress, right? Like the stresses and all that. Did you bring it home? Did you have a mechanism that you were able to like kind of departmentalize it?
A good question, but I would say I was under a significant amount of pressure at various points. But that did not seem to really eat on me like I watch and see it does on a lot of people. Now, I was fortunate enough in the late 70s to take a stress management course. And it really talked about stressors and how to deal with them. And many of the techniques in there just became kind of second nature to me, kind of natural. Um,
Could you share
so
one or two?
Yeah, I was just thinking about which ones would be appropriate to share here because,
I love
um,
this podcast. This is great.
yeah, well, one really solid example, which I still use, is quiet time. So if you're under stress, take time to get away. And a lot of people today are doing that with meditation or whatever. But for me, quiet time could mean just get out and walk, just get outside, get isolated. And so much of the time, we're so connected today with podcasts or music or news or whatever it is. You are going to have better mental health if you're not connected 100% of the time. So, one of the stress management things was isolation.
Yeah.
Then, another one of the stress management things was circle of friends. So, notice that having a broad number of friends, and notice deep friends are rare for most people. Many, many people don't have more than a few, three, four, five. You're lucky if you have, more than five really deep, close friends that do anything for you. But the stress recommendation was build deep relationships with many people. And, that really does take conversation and listening and spending time. And that's the other thing that, as an entrepreneur, it's very hard to come up with extra time. But what you have to do is take time to do those things.
Yeah.
So just like your marathon example earlier, you were really taking the time to do that. So um, other well-known people in this area in the past have said that there's, balance, and you have to figure out what your balance is in life. But many of the models have, 7 different vectors that you should manage. And the stress book said, figure out what your balance is and make sure that you allocate time to all of those. And the way you can tell you're allocating time is it appears on your calendar.
Yeah.
So you're taking time for, and again, I'm not telling your listeners they should do this, that, or the other, but take time to learn, take time for religion, take time for friendship, take time, whatever your things are. That's important. So there's many ways to lower stress, but the other thing is try to avoid having multiple stressors at the same time. Heavy stressors include things like starting a business, moving, doing a college degree, and I can name more. There was quite an interesting list, and it's like at the time that I took my stressor course, it's like, oh nuts! I've got 7 of these going on at one time. I better like unload some of these stressors.
Yeah. I mean, look, a few years ago, I moved from New York to New Jersey, and at the time, I was trying to get this podcast going. I just had a second child. I bought a house. I mean, I was under a great deal of stress, but growing up, I was used to the stress where it was manageable for me and not healthy, obviously, right? And my business lost a tremendous amount of revenue because my business is interest rate sensitive. So once interest rates went up, so I was in this like weird time frame of like, what do I do? How do I get through it? And that's when I realized, okay, where is the stress coming from, and what can I control? What can I control? I kind of took a piece of paper, just drew a line down the middle. These are things I can control and work on. These are things I can't control, right? And I can't really do much. So I just kind of doubled down on the things I can control, right? Health, time. I started looking for new markets or new areas of clients that I can pick up, which now has benefited me tremendously because I would have never done that unless the misfortune happened or the situation happened. I meditate every morning. I find it to really, really relax me and kind of clear my purpose, right? In the morning, for number one, I am very, I do like a humble, I'm grateful every morning once I wake up that I'm grateful I'm alive. I'm grateful for, and I pick really simple things like the warmth of the sun or the smell of a fresh cut grass, like something that's not emotional, but it's like a thing that I interact with that I enjoy or that brings me, or, a humbling feeling. Um, because in the end, people say life is short, but sometimes we're not even present, right? And what I do is when I drive around sometimes and I'm in my neighborhood, I'll look at someone's house, say, "Oh my God, I didn't realize their roof was that color." Or man, those window shades are really not like, like things that I just, because we're on our phones the whole time.
Yep.
We're not present.
In fact, that being present is so critical because you heard me say earlier, on the weekends, we focused on the kids. And again, it wasn't enough time, but
Yeah.
we were absolutely present. And trying to observe is really also critical because I watch way too many people just kind of go along. And I understand that going along can be easy, but if you're paying attention, there's just so much to enjoy.
Yeah.
And even under stress, stress will actually put blinders on you And if you take the time to enjoy, the blinders will come off and the stress will drop.
Yeah. Is there anything, any mindsets or any, actually, before we do that, uh, if you were in the original grocery store of your neighborhood where the grocer's son was, let's say, and you walk in and your 20-year-old self is there, right? And you can talk to them for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, what would you tell them?
Uh, Interesting, because I actually can picture everything as you're saying that, which is makes it a great question. And really, I can see all the employees, the butcher and the lady that did the checkout and the owner. I mean, I can see them all. But as 20-year-old selves, I probably would be very simple with them. I'd say, you know, what you do here every day makes a difference to a lot of different people. And it did.
That's great. That's very powerful, Randy. And what would you tell any young or new entrepreneurs? Like, I was coining the phrase, well, not coining it, but we're saying pre-entrepreneurs and new entrepreneurs. What would you tell them? What would some mindset or words that you can share with them?
Yeah, it's come up a few times as we've been going, but if I was starting something new, and I am right now, by the way, just for the record, which seems odd, but I am. It's actually supposed to launch in about 2 weeks. Um, if you're starting something new, be thoughtful about how it can help other people. Worry more about that first, and then as quickly as you can operationalize it, get your processes right. If you can keep that outward focus on how do I deliver the greatest, whatever it is, service level product and so forth, I think that will be a far more useful thing for you. And do take again that quiet time to get away and work that idea pretty hard. Uh, is there a way I can improve it? It's a pretty good idea. Can I improve it? And remember, it's going to be a period of continuous improvement on your idea, because what you see today, you will see differently as you get further down the road. And rarely is the first idea the best idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was the idea, was that the first episode I was going to do here, I wanted to be spectacular. And then I realized if you go to any of the successful podcasters or even radio, TV, the first episode, I mean, look at Seinfeld. The first episode was, it was all right. Wasn't that great?
You,
And then you look at the last one where I set a record for most views, right? And the way they pitched the executives for Seinfeld was, it's a sitcom about nothing, a couple people doing nothing, right?
yeah,
And then they got it, and it went on, and there was a slot, and then history happened, right? And then became a successful TV show.
yeah, it does take a
It's
while to get the rhythm on many things, and it's easy to get frustrated or fearful, and those negative emotions don't help you.
Yeah.
So focus on what you're doing for others, and the positive will be more likely to flow and better results will flow.
And I have one more, like a last question I wanted to ask you. When you're in these rooms with these companies developing, trying to find solutions to these problems and stuff, what mind frame are you using to work with them to get to a solution? Like, I know we mentioned earlier, you ask a question, you ask, and then you listen, right? But like, what was the process to get to the problem to the solution? Like, what mind frame did you use?
Yeah. So a most common question that I'll use is, what is it you believe you're trying to accomplish? Notice, not what are you trying to accomplish? What do you believe you're trying to accomplish? And they'll say, and then I usually will follow up with several annoyance. Why is that?
Mm,
Okay, help me understand that. So notice I'll iterate 2 or 3 or 4 times, having them explain what they're trying to do. And then I say, okay, I think I get where you're going. So what's the problem now you're trying to solve? And then they'll say that. And sometimes you'll say, okay, did you think about doing it like this? Because remember, you're never trying to tell, you're trying to get them to come up with the idea. Did you think about trying like this? And what will sometimes happen is stuff will come out off the wall, and you'll say, did you think about it like this? So I don't mind saying I was in a board meeting for a bank core processor that I sit on for a strategic planning event a year ago. And I, listened to all these outside uh, facilitators and all the board members, all smart people. And once they got done with everything, it's like, let me get to the flip chart for just a minute. I said, you go ahead and do what you're doing. Just let me think up here for a minute. And I kind of sketched out what they'd been talking about. And again, it was kind of off the wall. And I said, and they were trying to see what I'm doing. I said, don't worry, I'll tell you what I'm doing when I'm done. And I sketched out the idea and said, here's what I think I've heard all of you say. Does this look right? Okay. And I did the same thing when I created QuickBooks Pro Advisor program. And I did the same thing when I helped with creating NetSuite. Because I just said, here's what I think I heard you say. Is this what you meant? And in effect, you just provided a framework.
They couldn't get it out of their brain, really. They all had different thoughts, and you kind of just collected and kind of created the framework for them.
Yeah, that's very common because, again, you're in a room of very smart people, and sometimes they're contentious. That's okay, but egos get in the way. But everybody, you can learn something from everybody. So you ask those type of questions, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, here's what I think I heard. Did I hear it right? Because rarely do I come in pontificating. That gets nowhere. It's
Yeah.
like, you guys are all smarter than I am, but here's what I think I heard. And then usually you get that in the break afterwards. It was like, how'd you come up with that? I don't know. I just listened to you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. This is great. Randy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I loved your story. I didn't realize I was speaking to someone that literally created so much technology that we use on every single day. And we, I say me and the audience, thank you for that. And thank you for your principles of and your mission statement that you created in 1980, which was to help others, right? So I appreciate that. Thank you for your time here.
Thank you. You're certainly welcome. And, I always wanted these tools to be used in the best way possible. And many of the times they are. Unfortunately, sometimes they're not. So don't you use them in the wrong way. Use them in the
Yeah,
best way possible.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Randy. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.